Hello everyone, I hope you've had a lovely New Year's. Welcome back. We're going to be jumping straight into a lot of videos. I've had a lot of time to prepare. So, we're going to talk about vampires today. You see, at the time of recording this video, there's only two styles of factions that you can play with the vampire counts. Right now they play very similar, pretty much identical, but you've got the von Carstein bloodline, one of the famed first vampiric bloodlines, and also the necromancers. It's been more than 10 years for Total War Warhammer, and still we're missing some bloodlines. Now, the Lahmians are coming in the form of a FLC with the Lords of the End Times and patch 8.0. Neferata will be playable for free, which is fantastic. And it does make sense, of course. She is one of the 9 Mortarchs of Nagash. We'll have a video on the Mortarchs very soon. I've also got a video on how I expect it to play, but I want to talk about the others, because after the release of Neferata, we'll still be missing 3 of the 5 major bloodlines. The Strigoi, my personal favourite from 6th edition. The Blood Dragons, which have some form of representation with, well, just the Red Duke, and even then, not really that good. And finally, the Necrarch vampires, the big nerds. They've got some representation in game right now with the whole Blood Kiss system and getting those pseudo special lords. But it'd be pretty disappointing if we ended up to the end of the series and didn't get them. In fact, I'm actually kind of surprised that we are going all the way to the end times already, and yet nothing's there. It's kind of very similar to how it's gone with the Warriors of Chaos, right? When we got Champions of Chaos, we got all the representation types for the Warriors of Chaos. And I was kind of expecting that, and I think a lot of the fan base was expecting a Champions of Chaos style DLC for the vampires too. Now, I do think that this still is entirely possible. We know that character packs are a thing, and they are likely going to do smaller DLCs. It's very important to realize that also each of the bloodlines fight very differently compared to, say, for example, all the mono-god Warriors of Chaos factions. The Warriors of Chaos have their own differences, even when you're playing Azazel compared to Village, for example, but they're still very much the same. The von Carsteins, if they get their proper representation 8.0, should be using a lot of Imperial troops, being able to subjugate them, enthrall them, and be able to use a lot more gunpowder than the rest. We can already do that in vanilla, but very, very little, and it should be a lot more. I'd say most of the Empire roster. The Lahmians, I'm expecting to be focused on a lot on subterfuge, because it makes a lot of sense. Neferata likes to rule from the shadows, because while she is quite open to warfare, she knows that toppling empires and kingdoms and the rest is actually much easier from within. That leaves us with 3 more, and I want to talk about them specifically because there's a lot of really fun stuff about them. The Strigoi, for example, one of my favourites, can be very different depending on the type of Strigoi. We've actually seen some fairly good ones, well, just one really in the Border Princes, where he's self-serving, but to be honest, he does protect his kingdom. We've seen a massive Strigoi empire, which was basically toppled by Neferata in its first incarnation. She is a jealous sister after all. But we've also seen other Strigois just kind of stay in their own pathway, stay hidden away in caves alongside loads of ghouls. The Strigoi are more feral and less prone to magic, so you can see them doing a lot more damage, and we see that in-game, despite the fact that they've got the full access to the Lore of the Vampires, and they can basically be just as good spellcasters. The main thing about them is very heavy ghoul focus. In fact, there was like a proposed thing that never got released. This happens a lot with Warhammer Fantasy, by the way, of like a ghoul setting with some spitting ghouls and so on, so some basic range. But also, interestingly enough, when the Empire of the Strigos was a big thing, they had humans under them too, the Strigoi, which are kind of like nomadic people, skirmish fighters. They still are alive, they still exist in Warhammer Fantasy, even right to the point of the end times. Getting references in a lot of RPG books even to this day, and they still actively miss the Strigoi vampires, saying that, yeah, they had the better life when they were in charge. It could be kind of cool to see a ghoul-focused army, crypt ghouls, normal ghouls, Strigoi lords, Strigoi heroes, just more Strigoi in general, then being supported by Strigoi, which would kind of work very similar to like the skirmish horsemen for Bretonnia. They're not supposed to be amazing, and they're not supposed to be like endgame units, just a little bit of extra support. Though, mind you, ghouls aren't great either. Hell, I think they're still treated as like undead when they're supposed to be humanoid. Gameplay-wise, I could see them play like a normal vampire count faction, but focusing very heavily on ghouls, crypt ghouls, all the rest, and then getting access to the stronger stuff like Black Knights later on in the campaign. Hell, I could even imagine a war mechanic for your special Strigoi lords, focusing around ghouls, crypt ghouls, and the rest. Crypt horrors. I don't know why I keep calling them crypt ghouls. They're both the same thing. The idea here is just a feral, monstrous horde, and hell, there's a lot of stuff that could actually be done to make it quite unique. The good thing is a start position already exists for these vampires, basically just there in Morkheim. It's where the Empire Strigoi basically was its main seat. The issue is it's going to be stuck between Wurzag and Malagor, Skarbrand. It's not going to be an easy start, but it's a good start. Keep in mind that a lot of the vampires themselves are in the same area, generally. It's weird, but like the main core bloodlines mostly stayed around the old world center. Blood dragons are another missing type of bloodline, and this is an interesting one again. Not very focused on a lot of magic, instead very much on martial prowess. The blood dragons are supposed to be some of the best fighters in the Warhammer fantasy world, having discovered that the hunger that the vampires actually feel can be negated and cured by drinking the blood of a dragon. It's not an easy feat, but they have been able to do it. In general, they'll fight the dragon too. It's not like Zacharias from the Necrarch, who just like, there's a sleeping dragon, let me drain it. And we got a fair amount of blood dragons already, because I think actually both units were for free. If I remember correctly, one of them came out during one of the events that they did back in Warhammer 1, and then recently we've gotten the second one. There are missing some blood dragons on foot. They were never really a thing on the tabletop, but they were represented in certain ways, and I think it'll be kind of cool just to see blood dragons on foot. They should be able to use normal units like, skeletons, grave guards. The idea here is martial prowess, very similar to that of a Chaos Lord. Hell, they could even take the interpretation of, the Ascension thing by doing a certain amount of quests and doing a certain amount of battle stuff, being able to remove the hunger and then get some really powerful upgrades. Because you would only have access to like the bare minimum of the spell lore too. You shouldn't be able to see these guys as incredible spellcasters, but literally just the best blender lords in the game. Generically though, they shouldn't be able to beat Archaon, because it's Archaon the Everchosen. It's a bit weird though, because we know a few things about the next coming DLC. Warlock Harkon, who is a Motarch of Nagash and is very, very strong in his own right, would have probably been a very good example of a playable legendary lord here. And while he's confirmed, he's unfortunately a legendary hero, which is kind of odd. Mostly because they could have done some really fun stuff with this character by making him a vampire lord first, and then later down the line being able to fall to chaos as he does. Actually, a lot of, vampires, elves fall to chaos too. It's a weird time. End times is just weird. But he could have ended up getting some corn units, I mean, it's basically confirmed that we're going to be getting a lot of legendary heroes, but Warlock would have been a good choice for a lord. Now, this does make me wonder what Creative Assembly could actually do here. They could finally make the Red Duke playable, which, could work out, give him some themed mechanics, hell, maybe some Bretonnian units, and while it's not a true Bloodline vampire playthrough, you could still get Blood Dragon Lords, I guess, right? Because the other alternative is Abarash, but the problem with Abarash is there is not a lot of room in the map. Whereas there is room for Strigoi and there is room for Necrarch, I doubt that they're just going to put in the Bloodkeep now, It's very, very tight as it stands. We have very little room when it comes to the Immortal Empires map, so unless they decide to extend the map a little bit, which is something that they should really look towards, because like one region per, province per DLC is not really good enough. It doesn't add a lot of movement. Like, Sail is a bit of a slog because there's no way forward. All the Chaos factions are just fighting amongst themselves rather than becoming a threat. The character's already there too, so only a little bit of work needs to be done and that's it. It would be a massive shame if, that character who's been there for a while is fairly well known considering he has his own book. And even then, Musalon is not his actual start position. It's supposed to be Natois. But yeah, it'd be total shame if that just wasn't represented fully. It'd be good to just see those pseudo-lords being turned into generics just to have more access to them. Lastly, we do have the Necrarch vampires, so these guys are very, very proficient spellcasters. Think of them very similar to that of the necromancers, but even more so. They're not very good at fighting. In fact, most of them, barring Zacharias the Ever-Living, are incredibly frail. But they have a certain mastery over the winds of magic that the other vampires can't really get to, where I could see these having access to 2 different spell laws, hell, different spells from different laws. It would be kind of cool if we saw more of a rework towards spell laws and how you get access to different spells. because I feel like that's something that could be used a lot more. The benefit of these vampires is that they like to stay away, do their own thing. They've got loads of protection, but they're mostly just doing their own different research. So it could be that we could see Zacharias, which I think is probably the best option, and just anywhere across the world is probably a good thing. And basically a campaign could be focused around picking up ancient artifacts across the world, doing a little bit of a quest system, and the more that you pick up, the more spell lores you'll have access to. Not everything, because obviously a vampire still won't have access to, like, you know, Lore of Light and stuff, but it would be kind of cool to see a vampire faction focused very heavily on spellcasting, getting a little bit of barrier in. I do feel like barrier as a mechanic is really, really cool. It's a shame that it's mostly just used with Tzeentch. I admit that I don't have a lot of ideas for the Necrarch vampires, and that's mostly because I just don't find them that interesting, but I know a lot of people do like them. Whereas, in reality, the Strigoi, my personal favourites, are actually the least liked. It is important to note that there are other vampire bloodlines. The fact is that there's stuff like the Jade-Blooded, and there's others which may or may not remain in canon, like one in Araby, for example. I don't imagine the Araby one, mostly because Araby is so chock-a-block right now. You can't breathe there, you know, since they added Repans and obviously Arkan. It's interesting to see how things can go with potentially the Jade-Blooded vampires, right? Like, it's an odd thing because right now I don't see anything happening with them, but there's always a possibility, especially since Games Workshop seem to be hitting Cafe very, very hard for the old world. So there is a possibility, but I would say that it would be a massive disservice to 6th edition. And in general, yes, I know this game is supposed to focus around 8th, but keep in mind that in the past few years, CA have been leaning towards 6th a lot for content. I feel like it would be a massive shame if we don't get the other main bloodlines represented with at least a playable legendary lord. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about vampires today because I am sorting out the shelves and I'm repairing a bunch of vampires. Yeah, the move has been great. Not a lot of stuff did break, but the stuff that did break was fragile. Fine cast. Pain. But yeah, so vampires for today. Likely I'm going to talk about some vampire stuff tomorrow. I've got a lot of video plans. There should be a lot more coming on. Basically, my plan is to have a lot more content, being more consistent, and I've got a lot of tabletop ideas that will be coming to you very soon. Let me know what you guys think about the vampire stuff in the comments below. Start a bit of a discussion, and I'll let you know when the streams kick up again. I'm just waiting for like my family to leave as they were visiting for the holidays, and obviously I don't want to ignore them. So have a great one, guys. I'll see you all again very, very soon.